Maggie Turner, a woman with tired eyes but an unmistakable sparkle, supported her son Jasper with her simple job at a bakery in the heart of a small town in Kansas. From an early age, Maggie did everything to provide Jasper with a decent childhood, despite the difficulties. She sacrificed all she could, always putting Jasper's needs above her own. Her gestures were immensely tender. Maggie would wake up before dawn to prepare breakfast with care, letting the sweet smell of pancakes fill the humble house they maintained with so much effort. Jasper, for his part, was a boy full of dreams who, from a young age, longed for a different life. His talent for business and his desire to live beyond the limits of the small town were so remarkable that even the neighbors commented on it. For Maggie, her son had a special glow, something that deserved the world. It was a mixture of pride and sadness to see his gaze lost in the clouds, wishing for horizons she knew she could not offer there. When the day finally came for Jasper to leave for New York, Maggie was torn. Proud, but haunted by the idea of being alone, she packed his bags with the same care as when she wrapped him in blankets as a baby. On the day of goodbye, she accompanied him to the old bus station, with a smile so tight it seemed to beg her not to cry. Jasper held her hands, with eager eyes and an air of someone who already saw himself in a world of opportunities and success. "Mom, I promise I'll do everything I can to give back what you did for me," he said with contained enthusiasm. For Maggie, it was the end of an era, the final point of a long story written every day since she first held him in her arms. But she just smiled and encouraged him. "I know, dear. And even if you never came back, I would know that you found your way. But promise me one thing, Jasper. Don't let this world steal your heart." Jasper gave a confident smile, but Maggie noticed, with a tight heart, that he was already distant. He got on the bus, and Maggie stood there, with the Kansas wind blowing through her gray hair, as the vehicle moved away, taking not just her son but a piece of her. As the bus disappeared in the distance, Maggie felt life would be different from then on. She would return to an empty house, to a routine where silence was her only companion. At that moment, her heart filled with hope, but also with an unknown fear. Jasper was heading toward the bright future she had dreamed for him, but Maggie felt that perhaps there was a price to be paid for so much ambition. The years passed, and the silence that had filled Maggie's home gave way to a simple and solitary routine. She kept busy in the bakery, where everyone knew her story and often asked about Jasper. Maggie always answered with pride, speaking of the few but exciting letters and phone calls she received from New York. In these conversations, Jasper shared fragments of his life in the city, the achievements, the difficulties, and how opportunities seemed to multiply every day. Maggie clung to these words, filling her heart with quiet pride despite the constant longing. One day, at the end of a tiring shift, while wiping her flour-covered hands, the phone rang. It was a call from Jasper, but this time, there was something different in his voice. He sounded more excited than ever, with a youthful enthusiasm Maggie hadn't heard in a long time. "Mom, you have to come visit me in New York," he insisted, almost not giving her space to think. Surprised, Maggie tried to deflect, explaining that she couldn't leave work and that tickets were expensive. But Jasper was determined. "I already bought the tickets. You'll stay at my house, Mom. I want you to see everything I've built." With a mix of excitement and apprehension, Maggie agreed, not knowing exactly what to expect. On the day of her departure, Maggie put on her simplest yet most elegant clothes, still unable to believe she was boarding a plane to visit her son in one of the world's most impressive cities. During the flight, she could hardly hide her nervousness. New York was a distant and dazzling idea, something she only knew from movies and Jasper's animated descriptions. What had he built? Would he be the same pure-hearted young man she had raised? Or had the city changed something in him? These questions ran through her mind as the plane approached the metropolis, lit up like a sparkling jewel. When she landed, Jasper awaited her in the airport lobby. He looked different, more elegant, dressed in brand-name clothes that Maggie wouldn't even know how to pronounce. But he still hugged her with the same intensity as always, as if he were still the young boy she held in her arms. "Welcome, Mom," he said with a broad smile. "You won't believe my house. I made sure to bring you here to show you every accomplishment." Maggie followed Jasper through the busy airport, trying to absorb everything around her. They took a cab that drove them through the bustling streets of Manhattan, with its colorful signs and the glow of lights reflecting on the skyscraper windows. The city was much grander than she imagined, and Maggie felt a mix of admiration and discomfort. Everything was immense and impersonal, a reality so far from her quiet life in Kansas. When they arrived at Jasper's building, a luxurious glass and steel structure, Maggie felt her heart race. Jasper entered confidently, greeting the doorman with familiarity. They went up to the top floor, and then Jasper opened the door to an apartment that looked more like a magazine scene. Elegant furniture, impeccable decor, and a wide view of the city gleaming at dusk. Maggie was silent for a few moments, absorbing every detail. She never imagined Jasper could go so far, building something so impressive. But at the same time, there was a strange feeling, a coldness she couldn't pinpoint. Jasper guided her through the apartment, showing every corner as if it were a trophy. "So, Mom, was it worth it?" he asked, with a look loaded with expectation. Maggie smiled, trying to hide her discomfort. "It's all very beautiful, Jasper. But are you happy here?" she asked, breaking the silence and touching on something deeper. Jasper looked away for a brief second, then, with a somewhat calculated smile, replied, "Of course, Mom. I have everything I ever wanted." But Maggie felt something different in his words, something that made her uneasy. There was an emptiness between the lines, a coldness that echoed in that immaculate apartment. And without Jasper noticing, Maggie wondered if the visit would reveal something deeper than she imagined, a secret perhaps hidden in the shadows of that dazzling success. Maggie's first night in Jasper's apartment was marked by an inexplicable discomfort. She tried to rest in the guest room, decorated with elegant furniture, but the opulence of the place seemed almost suffocating. Every minute, Maggie turned in bed, thinking about how her son's life had transformed in ways she would never have imagined. Deep down, there was a void that bothered her, like a feeling that something was out of place. At dawn, Maggie decided to explore the apartment a little while Jasper went out for a meeting. She wandered through the spacious rooms, admiring each detail, but also feeling a disconcerting coldness. On a glass table in the living room, she noticed a picture frame displaying a photo of Jasper alongside some unknown men, all wearing expensive clothes and with calculated looks. Maggie felt strange looking at the image. It seemed that the Jasper in the photo was not the same gentle boy she had raised. As Maggie continued exploring, she found traces of a life she could not recognize. She noticed a collection of items that contrasted with the simplicity Jasper always displayed when he was younger. Luxury watches, tailored suits, expensive bottles of wine. And then, something made her stop. A door at the end of the hallway, slightly open, seemed to invite her to see what was inside. Even hesitating, Maggie approached, her heart beating faster with each step. She pushed the door open, revealing a small office but decorated with sophistication. On top of the desk, she saw an open folder filled with papers and notes. At first glance, the documents seemed to be financial records, but Maggie soon realized they contained terms she could barely understand, full of extremely high amounts and enigmatic codes. Some sheets had names that seemed familiar, maybe of politicians or businessmen she had heard about in the news. Maggie began to feel a slight chill down her spine. Her maternal instinct whispered that those papers were not ordinary documents, and that there was something deeply wrong. At that moment, Maggie noticed a crumpled photo at the bottom of the half-open drawer, partially hidden. She pulled it out carefully, and upon unfolding the image, felt her heart tighten. It was a photo of Jasper at a gala event, but the look on his face did not carry the liveliness and pride she knew. Instead, there was a tense expression, almost one of resignation. Suddenly, she heard the sound of the apartment door opening. Jasper had returned earlier than expected, and the sound of his steps echoed in the silence of the hallway. Frightened, Maggie quickly closed the drawer and left the office, returning to the living room and pretending to be distracted by the view from the window. Jasper entered the room with a smile that seemed forced. "Mom, are you enjoying the view?" he asked, in a casual tone that barely hid a slight discomfort. Maggie tried to hide her apprehension. "Yes, dear. It's all very beautiful," she replied, casting a look as if trying to absorb the surroundings, but without mentioning the discovery she had made moments before. Jasper seemed slightly suspicious, but did not press further. He invited Maggie to go out and explore the city, suggesting a tour through famous neighborhoods and tourist spots that he said were unmissable. Maggie agreed, trying to keep a smile, but her mind was far away, immersed in the questions and suspicions that echoed in her heart. What did Jasper really do? Where did all that money come from? And who were the men in the photos beside him? As they walked around New York, Maggie observed him in every word, every gesture, trying to recognize the son she had raised. But all she saw was a distant man, trapped in a world that seemed increasingly strange to her. Deep down, she knew that this visit would reveal something beyond what she imagined. The question was she prepared for what was to come? The tour around New York brought momentary relief to Maggie, but upon returning to the apartment, she felt a growing unease. Something inside her said that the luxury surrounding Jasper was tied to secrets he was still unwilling to reveal. That night, as Jasper prepared for a late meeting, he advised her to rest and mentioned he might not return before dawn. Maggie nodded, forcing a smile, but as soon as he left, something drove her to investigate further. Walking through the apartment in silence, Maggie examined every detail carefully. In one of the rooms, she noticed a door different from the others, one that was carefully locked. She couldn't open it, but an irresistible impulse to understand what her son was hiding filled her mind. After minutes of hesitation, Maggie spotted a key discreetly hanging on a key holder on the wall. Perhaps Jasper hadn't imagined she would find the key there. With a trembling hand, she put the key in the lock and turned it. The sound of the lock echoed through the apartment, and Maggie found herself facing a small office, different from what she had already explored. Upon entering, a chill ran through her body. In the corner of the room, on a high shelf, photos and documents were neatly arranged, but their images told a disturbing story. Maggie approached a series of photos in which Jasper appeared at luxurious night events, alongside figures who exuded power and mystery. Examining closer, she noticed that some of these figures had been featured in newspaper covers for financial scandals and arrests. Maggie felt her heart tighten as she tried to understand why Jasper was associated with such suspicious people. In some images, he maintained a forced smile, but his gaze seemed empty, as if lost among these strange characters. Among the papers on the desk, Maggie found contracts and agreements mentioning unknown companies with impressive amounts. One of the contracts was signed by Jasper, and in small print, Maggie read a clause mentioning mandatory commitments with these companies. She sat down, feeling the weight of fear and disappointment. For the first time, she realized that Jasper's success seemed entangled in something much bigger and darker than anything she could have imagined. Then, a letter caught her attention. Folded and kept inside a discreet envelope, it was handwritten, with Jasper's name at the top, but the content was threatening. In a few lines, the letter warned Jasper to fulfill his commitments without fail and mentioned severe consequences if he tried to leave the agreement. Maggie felt a lump in her throat. The letter's words echoed in her mind, and she finally understood that Jasper was trapped in a dangerous web, forced to maintain a life of appearances to sustain his place in that world. Suddenly, the sound of the key turning in the front door interrupted her thoughts. Maggie, filled with panic, gathered the papers as best she could, putting them back where she found them. She left the office with her heart racing, closing the door behind her as she heard Jasper's footsteps in the hallway. When he entered the room, he seemed surprised to see her awake but quickly masked it, offering a tense smile. "Mom, I thought you were asleep," he said in an almost suspicious tone. Maggie tried to control her breathing, smiling back. "The city keeps me awake. I was just looking at the lights through the window." Jasper observed her for a moment, and she felt an invisible barrier rising between them. At that moment, Maggie realized she needed to confront him, but she knew she would have to choose her words carefully. She now understood that her son was entangled in something far more complicated. A dangerous path he had chosen, perhaps out of ambition, perhaps out of desperation. In silence, Maggie knew it wasn't yet time to confront him directly. She returned to her room with a heavy heart, knowing that her love for Jasper would make her do everything possible to help him escape that dark world, but at the same time, feeling the weight of the questions that grew with each passing minute. Who, or what, really kept Jasper trapped in that life? The next day, the tension between Maggie and Jasper was palpable. She observed every gesture and word of his with a mixture of affection and anguish, not knowing where to start a conversation that, for her, was inevitable. Jasper, always evasive, kept himself busy, replying to emails on his phone or leaving for urgent meetings. After a silent breakfast, Maggie decided she could no longer delay. She needed answers, and the only person who could provide them was Jasper himself. When he returned to the apartment in the late afternoon, Maggie was waiting for him in the living room, with a serious expression that he quickly noticed. Jasper paused at the entrance, looking at her with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Mom, is everything okay?" he asked, trying to keep a casual tone, but Maggie's look made him hesitate. "Jasper, we need to talk," she said, without preamble, her heart racing. He frowned but sat down next to her, crossing his hands in a defensive gesture. "I noticed some things I would have preferred not to see," she continued, choosing her words carefully without taking her eyes off her son. Jasper remained silent, but his tense look said he knew exactly what she was talking about. "Mom, I don't know what you imagine, but what I do is complicated," he began, in a tone that mixed justification and defensiveness. "Life in New York isn't easy, and sometimes you have to make decisions that, well, aren't ideal but are necessary." Maggie leaned forward, holding his hands in hers. "Son, I saw the papers, the contracts, and I saw the letter. I know these people you got involved with aren't honest. But, Jasper, what led you to this? Since when did my son become someone who needs to make deals with such dangerous people?" For a moment, Jasper looked away, clearly uncomfortable. He took a deep breath, as if trying to organize his thoughts, then spoke in a softer tone. "I didn't have a choice, Mom. When I got here, I realized the market is much more aggressive than I imagined. And things started unfolding, opportunities. Well, I didn't know what I was getting into." Maggie squeezed his hands, trying to calm him. "I understand, dear, but at what cost? Do you really feel good living like this, knowing that these deals can destroy everything you've built?" Jasper seemed hesitant, but the pain in his eyes said it all. "I tried to get out, Mom. Believe me, I tried. But at this point, they control almost everything in my life. I thought I was achieving something for us, that I could give you everything you always deserved. But now I see that I lost control." Maggie felt tears forming in her eyes. Seeing her son, who had always been so dreamy and determined, so trapped in a web of dark commitments, broke her heart. "My son, you don't need this. It doesn't matter what you have or what you've lost. You'll always have me, and we can start over. We can leave this world that consumes you." Jasper shook his head, with a mixture of pain and skepticism. "It's not that simple, Mom. These men don't let anyone leave. And if I try to break these ties, they might. It could be dangerous, both for me and for you." Those words made Maggie shiver, but they also brought her an unexpected strength. The love and courage she had for her son were greater than the fear those men caused her. She held his shoulders firmly, looking him in the eyes. "Then we'll do this together, son. Whatever the cost, whatever the path. I won't abandon you, and we'll find a way out." Jasper seemed shaken, fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. Finally, he gave in, hugging Maggie with an intensity she hadn't felt in years. The weight of the situation was still there, but in that moment, he found a moment of comfort in his mother's unconditional love. For the first time, Jasper saw a glimmer of redemption, a light that came from his mother, the one person who would never abandon him. As they sat down for breakfast, a heavy silence hung between Maggie and Jasper. Despite the love and understanding they shared, the air between them was dense, full of unspoken words and fear of the unknown. Jasper, as determined as he was to leave that life, still seemed hesitant, as if luxury and power were invisible chains. While they served themselves, Maggie watched her son, remembering when he was little and how he was always fascinated by a falling leaf in autumn or the first snow of winter. She felt as if that dreamy boy was buried under the weight of the choices he had made, and in that moment, she made a decision. "Jasper," she began, with a tone firmer than usual. "This life here, what has it brought you? Remember when you wanted to change the world? I know there are risks. I know the path to leave this can be frightening, but it's the right thing to do, son. We need to seek help and leave all of this behind." Jasper took a deep breath, his gaze lost in memories. "Mom, the truth is, I wanted to give you everything we never had. But this money, this life, it's like a gilded prison. I feel like all of this is suffocating me. But it's the only world I know now." Maggie moved closer and held his hand. "Dear, money means nothing if there's no peace. Remember when we almost lost the house? You always said that one day you would take me to a better place, to protect me from everything. And look, here we are. But now it's me who needs to protect you from this world that's consuming you. Let's take the first step together." Feeling the weight of his mother's words, Jasper stood up and walked to the large window of the apartment, looking out at the city with a reflective expression. The New York skyline, imposing and grand, seemed to mock him, as if reminding him that the control he believed he had was just an illusion. As he looked at the lights twinkling in the distance, Jasper got lost in a sea of memories. A vision of his childhood came to mind. He and Maggie, walking hand in hand in a sunflower field, near a farm they visited on a weekend. He had promised that one day they would be rich, and Maggie, with a gentle smile, had simply said, "Wealth is what we have in each other, son." These memories brought him back to himself, and he realized that Maggie's love and support were what truly mattered. "Mom, you're right. I want out of this. I don't want this weight on my shoulders anymore. I just don't know how. These people don't let anyone leave." Maggie approached, placing her hand on his shoulder. "We'll find a way. We'll leave New York and seek help. There are good people who can guide us, and I'll be with you every step of the way." That afternoon, Maggie began packing her things, while Jasper watched, still immersed in uncertainty. Suddenly, as he went through one of the drawers in the bedroom, he found an old gold watch, a gift he had given Maggie as one of his first purchases with his money. He looked at the object with a mixture of pride and shame, realizing how the shine of success had blinded him. Returning to the living room, he extended the watch to Maggie with a serious look. "This was a symbol of how much I wanted to give you everything. But now I see there's no value in things like this if there's no truth behind them." Maggie looked at him, with tears in her eyes, and hugged him. That embrace was a sign of reconciliation and acceptance, and they both knew they were ready for what was to come. Before they went to sleep, they shared a simple and nostalgic dinner. During the meal, Maggie reminded Jasper of a day, years ago, when they went through a difficult situation. She recalled the night when he, still a child, had fallen asleep in her arms, not knowing they were almost losing the house. "I promised you that night that I would never leave you alone. And I keep that promise, Jasper." His gaze was emotional again, and he replied, with a choked voice, "Mom, you're the only good thing I have. You've always been my reason, and I'm so sorry for letting all this consume me. I don't deserve what you do for me, but I'm grateful with all my heart." Jasper closed his eyes, and with Maggie's hand intertwined with his, felt an indescribable calm for the first time in years. They were ready to start over. That night, before sleeping, Maggie watched the city lights for the last time. The next day, they would leave New York, and she felt that this would be the beginning of a life with dignity, where love and integrity would be at the center of everything. If you're not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe so you don't miss any of our emotional stories. Click now on the video appearing on your screen to watch another touching story.